This is pure nonsense.
Yes,
this is pure... Norman, you are lying. You are lying.
What do you think happens if you drop...
you are lying.
Professor Morris, what do you think happens if you drop nuclear weapons on Iran? What do you think happens?
No, not on Iran.
This is so dishonest.
Explain about it. The Hamas built itself a lot.
Jesus Christ. That's a wild statement.
Gaza would kill lots of civilians and then would, of course, be blamed for it. This is pure nonsense.
Professor Morris!
You do seem oddly keen to defend Iran.
He said that we can't trust Iran. You're such a shameless liar.
As we record this debate, the world is still waiting for an Iranian attack on Israel. Ayatollah Khomeini says that Iran has a duty to take revenge after...
We'll watch like 5 minutes of this.
At the moment, the Iranians are threatening revenge against Israel. The Hezbollah is threatening revenge against Israel for knocking out several of the leaders of these proxy forces, which I think Israel has every right to do and to have done. Maybe a major confrontation is on the cards between Israel and Iran. The major problem for Israel, incidentally, hasn't been mentioned, not by Norman or yourself, and that is that Iran not just wants to destroy Israel, but is busy building or trying to build nuclear weapons in order to destroy Israel. And Israel should have taken these nuclear installations out before the Iranians approached weaponization and didn't do so, and perhaps will hopefully, if there is a major clash with Iran, will do so now and use the opportunity to destroy the nuclear installations which they built in order to weaponize and build nuclear weapons. The problem for Israel is that Israel may not have the capability to do it by itself. It may be able to damage, but it may not be able to actually destroy the Iranian nuclear project.
Top Gun
and for that,
2.
It probably needs American help.
They need Tom
American
Cruise.
presidents have been very reluctant, like Netanyahu, to confront the Iranians, and so far haven't done anything except talk about not allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons, but haven't actually done anything to stop the Iranians.
Okay, before I go to Norman to respond to that, can I just ask you, Benny Morris, does Israel have nuclear weapons?
I don't know. I've never been invited to Dimona or wherever they stockpile them, so I don't know. But most Western intelligence agencies says Israel has a nuclear stockpile. They say Israel has at least 200 nuclear weapons, and I assume they know what they're talking about.
But we know exactly how many nuclear weapons the United States has, Russia has, China has, the UK has. Why is it the world?
Is that true? Is that all like super public information that is that like a required reporting that we know exactly how many nuclear weapons that every nuclear power has? Do we know exactly how many nuclear weapons every superpower has? The exact number of nuclear weapons in each country's possession is a closely held national secret, so the estimates presented here come with significant uncertainty. Most nuclear-armed states provide essentially no information about the sizes of their nuclear stockpiles. Okay, so then no, we don't. These are just like estimates, basically. Wait, between 2010 and 2018, the U.S. disclosed its total stockpile size, but since in 2019, the Trump administration stopped that practice. In 2020, Biden restored it, but then he declined to declassify any U.S. stockpile data for 2021, 22, or 23. In 2021, the UK announced that it would no longer disclose public figures for its operational stockpile. Oh, okay, I don't know. Maybe, I guess it's all over the place. Okay, maybe.
The world has no idea how many Israel has, and why is it when I asked Netanyahu directly that question, he refused to answer?
Because Israel has always had a policy of ambiguity in relation to the nuclear weapons. Israel believes...
They also have ambiguity in response to any sort of, like, I think, extraterritorial attacks as well, I believe. I don't think Israel ever confirms when they do, like, if the Mossad does, like, a foreign assassination or when they do, like, strikes. Like, I could be wrong. I don't think they ever confirmed that they did the strike in that consulate attached to the embassy in Syria to kill... Oh, fuck. Who did they kill for that one? Somebody will have it. I don't think Israel ever confirms these hits ever. They always do ambiguity. Now everybody knows it was them, but I don't think they ever officially confirm it. I don't believe. Khashoggi? No. I think it was, some IRGC fellow. I think some Iranian dude.
So long as it didn't announce that it possesses nuclear weapons, it wouldn't provoke other countries around to try and possess them themselves. Ambiguity was seen as the best policy. I'm not sure that was right, but that was Israeli policy. Okay. But I think the world, as I said, does know that Israel does possess these weapons.
But it does. But Norman Finkelstein, it is odd, isn't it, that we just don't know? I mean, there's Benny Morris sort of casually saying that it may have as many as 200 nuclear weapons. I've certainly never heard that from any member of the Israeli government. They refuse to even acknowledge they have one.
Well, Benny Morris is an odd bird. I'm using a euphemism there. Because he says one thing and then he says another thing. He's like Quicksilver. It's very hard to pin him down. So I won't go back to 1950. I won't go back to the early 50s. People can read the book, Israel's Border Wars. I read it 3 times, so I think I know it pretty well. And people can decide for themselves. let's move to what Benny Morris just had to say. Benny Morris has, since 2008, that's the earliest date I've noticed, every 2 years he publishes an op-ed in some Western newspaper, and sometimes in the Israeli newspapers, calling for an Israeli attack on Iran. Now, Benny Morris now says, we don't know whether Israel has nuclear weapons. Well, that's a very odd thing for him to say, because Benny Morris has been explicitly blackmailing the West since 2008, saying, if you don't, meaning the United States, if the US doesn't join in an attack on Iran, we, meaning Israel, have no alternative except to use non-conventional, that is to say, nuclear weapons. So, if I can quote him now, it is doubtful that its conventional capabilities will be sufficient to destroy the Iranian nuclear project. Then, non-conventional weaponry will have to be used to stymie the project. And then
It is doubtful that its conventional capabilities will be sufficient. This is from 2008. Source, Norman Finkelstein. What is this interview? Wait, what did he say this interview was from? We've got Zionism Observer, and Norman Finkelstein. Knowing Too Much by Norman Finkelstein. On Iran, a stark choice. Los Angeles Times. On Iran, a stark choice. Benny Morris. Full article. The fuck is this first link? Oh, okay. Okay, Benny Morris.
and its non-capabilities will be sufficient, so, except to use non-conventional, that is to say, nuclear weapons. So, if I can quote him now, it is doubtful that its conventional capabilities will be sufficient to destroy the Iranian nuclear project. Then, non-conventional weaponry will have to be used to stymie the project. And many innocent Iranians will die. But the Iranians will have brought this upon themselves by bringing to power and leaving in power a leadership that will...
Wait, can somebody find this? What is he quoting? I can't find this. Stinkhat. Okay, who just did this? Hold on. Don't ape hands me to a guy who's linking a meme that I already ignored just to have me click on some shit that's not at all relevant to what the fuck we're talking about. God, that's so fucking annoying. Okay. Can somebody show me what he's quoting Benny Morris out of? So I'm seeing we've got Norman Finkelstein has this quote in 2008. Will be used to stymie the project. Norm Finkelstein. Knowing Too Much, where the Jewish American Roman... Oh, Norm Finkelstein. Benny Morris, The Second Holocaust, The Threat to Israel. May 20... MiddleEastFreedomForum.com. Benny Morris, When Armageddon Lives Next Door, LA Times. Benny Morris on Iran, A Stark Choice, LA Times. On February 14, 20... Oh, I Googled the wrong thing. Speaking in Berlin, Morris said... Okay. February 14th, 2012, Morris, Berlin. It's, okay. Okay. Let's see how Benny responds, I guess. Look on YouTube. Can I do before 2013? I'm never going to be able to find this. Or wait, 2012. No, yeah, February. Okay, whatever. We'll see what Benny says. I don't know where this quote comes from.
Forced Israelis to do what was necessary in order to survive. So, Benny Morris, who doesn't know whether Israel possesses nuclear weapons, nonetheless says Israel will have to use.
I'm curious what Benny means when he says he doesn't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. I know they haven't. I know that they haven't formally announced it, but as a historian, I thought that Israel talked about considering nuclear weapons in the beginning of Yom Kippur. Like, I thought that was like a historically understood thing.
Non-conventional weapons, and he says many Iranians will have to die, maybe in the millions, maybe tens of millions, but they deserved it.
Really?
Because well, that's what he said. Mr. Morris, you can laugh till kingdom come, but I'm quoting your words. But he said that's okay because they voted for the regime.
No, this is absurd. This is absurd. I said Israel.
No.
And then let me respond. Let me respond.
Oh wait, hold on. Somebody found this. Oh, is this where you're going to? Are you going to link me things that you haven't read because you Googled and you linked me the very first thing you saw and it's not actually going to have the quote at all that we're talking about because the thing that you just linked me is from 2024, meaning it's obviously not the quote from 2012 that he's referring to. Is that, hold on, I don't know why I'm reading this. I already know this isn't what I'm looking for. Okay, don't worry about it. Just don't. I need like trusted linkers. We need to bring back the trusted flyer. Holy shit.
I think, Norman, hang on. Norman, I think Benny Morris should be able to respond to your direct charge there because you accused him of laughing at it.
I didn't charge anything. I quoted him.
No, you said he was laughing about it. So let me get Benny Morris to explain what he's doing.
As is your want, you didn't quote me properly. What I said was that if Israel is unable with conventional weapons to destroy the Iranian project, and if the Americans don't do it in conjunction with Israel or by themselves, Israel will be forced to use non-conventional weapons and attack the nuclear installations. Not kill millions of Iranians. No. You said millions of Iranians. I've never said anything. I have never said.
I think one of the most ridiculous, immediately on its face, untrustworthy, unacademic, and if you work in academia and you disagree with me, suck my dick, you're a hack fuck, and people like you should be banned from academia, is quoting somebody else in your own source material. I can't think of a more immediately ridiculous thing where nobody should take you seriously if you say, I've got a quote here from X person, and you're quoting your own fucking book. Quote the speech. Quote or source the speech. He does this. He's got quotes here from his own book. Why would you quote? Like, you understand that you're this. Like, this is you. Destiny, the source in the book is as follows. No, it's not. Whatever you just linked me is wrong. Unless you're linking a different book. We can see the source in the book. He says it. Clicking through the maze of horrible fucking links. I don't think there is a written source for this. I think it was a spoken speech. Spoken, obviously. Oh, wait, this one went to something different. Hold on. Oh, wait, he did. Oh, no. Wait, this is Norman Finkelstein again. Oh, wait, I understand why you think this is the case. Because he links it incorrectly here. Wait. He says that the... Like the Jinsen neocons, he has been repeatedly exhorting the U.S. to join Israel in an attack in Iran. What's more, he's even rattled the threat that if Israel has to go it alone, it will have no recourse except to nuke Iran. And then he reads this quote, and then he sources a second Holocaust, the threat to the threat to Israel. And then it links to this Middle East Forum bullshit site that dies in 2008. But when we looked at his... So in his book, he says... Oh, no, wait. I can't tell. Hold on. Never mind. Forget it. I don't know. I don't know where the source for this quote is. Okay, so he says, Benny Morris, a second Holocaust, the threat to Israel. And then he links MiddleEastFreedomForum.org. Then he says Benny Morris, he quotes from Obama's Nuclear Spring, The Guardian, in 2009. Benny Morris, when Armageddon lives next door. And then that's the LA Times in 2010. Then he says Benny Morris on Iran, a stark choice. The LA Times, the 14th February 2012. And then he puts, speaking in Berlin, Morris said, and then he gives this quote here. I don't know what the fuck this quote is from when he's listing 4 or 5 other sources up here. Somebody linked something different. I don't know. Is this? Do you write? What are we even writing here? Holy shit! And then Jesus. Okay. And then your source is ultimately just A Second Holocaust, which is, I think it's his. This is one of his books, isn't it? Hold on. Did we decide that? A Second Holocaust, The Threat to Israel. Or maybe it's a Benny Morris. I don't. Okay. Let's listen to this at least.
Rich. Or will they move their money out? Beguiling chant that us secular, liberal, humanistic people cannot even hear.
Okay.
To the temptation of jihadist...
At least we can finally fucking hear the quote, though. Jesus, fuck, what a nightmare of links and autistic shit.
Martyrdom and 70 to the shadow of Iranian nuclear power. What Arab, indeed what Palestinian, will make peace with Israel once assured of the backing of Iranian nuclear weapons? Will Oman and Qatar make peace? Will the Saudi peace initiative remain on the table? And how will Israel fare in the shadow of an Iranian nuclear arsenal, which an Iranian leader could unleash whenever it suited his purposes? Will foreign tourists continue to visit Israel? Will foreign investors continue to build plants in Israel?
What is he reading from? Hold on. Foreign investors continue to build plants in Israel? I just heard him flip a page, and it sounds like he's reading from something.
Continue to visit Israel? Will foreign investors continue to build plants in Israel? And will Israel's own rich, or will they move their money out of the country, out of harm's way? And will Israelis fearful of extinction not mob foreign embassies for visas to America and Europe? And what Jew will want to immigrate to Israel in such circumstances? Will Jews and investors really rely on the guarantee of the American or Israeli nuclear umbrella to deter the Iranians? Iran's leaders are not the cool, hard-headed opportunists who inhabited the Kremlin in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. The threat of mutually assured destruction probably does not move them. They march to a different tune, to a rough and beguiling chant that us secular, liberal, humanistic people cannot even hear, to the temptation of jihadist martyrdom and 70 dark-eyed virgins beckoning from the heavenly paradise. In truth, we don't really know what the mad mullahs of Tehran will do, but we cannot take a chance. Realistic leaders in Washington and Jerusalem cannot allow Tehran to have the bomb. And in the coming months or year, must do what is necessary to halt and destroy the Iranian nuclear project.
Here's a quote. Jesus.
And if this involves a protracted conventional air assault on the Iranian nuclear facilities, then so be it. The Iranians will have brought that assault on their own heads. And if conventional weapons cannot do the job, and if Israel is forced to go the course alone, it is doubtful that its conventional capabilities will be sufficient to destroy the Iranian nuclear project. The non-conventional weaponry will have to be used to stymie the project, and many innocent Iranians will die. But the Iranians will have brought this upon themselves by bringing to power and leaving in power a leadership that will have forced Israel to do what was necessary to survive. It is terrible to contemplate the use of nuclear weapons to prevent others, murderous Iranian leaders, from acquiring nuclear weapons, and it raises agonizing moral questions. But a second Holocaust is an even more horrific prospect to contemplate.
Interesting place that he cut this quote off here, but okay.
I do not really realistically expect Europe to lead the way.
I'm just curious if he ever says his tens of millions of Iranians will die.
Neutralizing the Iranian nuclear.
Would you put Norman Finkelstein on the same level as David Irving? I haven't personally dived into David Irving's work, so Finkelstein is either the same as or worse than Irving. I don't know if he's worse or not, though, because I know that Irving is widely discredited.
Nuclear project. But it is important that Europe back those countries that will in the end be forced to do what may be necessary. Indeed, such support may be a precondition for American and or Israeli action.
That was pointing things out in very stark terms. It's good we've laid out the alternatives on the table. Short of that, there are still things we can do or could refrain from doing, and I think Matthias Kunze will be able to tell us quite a lot about that, and he'll be talking in German.
Yes, since I think we have such a great translating service that I don't need to talk in English, and I prepared my paper in German. So please take your phone set and listen to the translation if you can't understand me now.
Okay.
I have never said anything about millions of Iranians.
Morris,
this is pure nonsense.
Yes,
this is pure... Norman,
you are lying.
You are lying.
What do you think happens
Norman,
if you drop...
you are lying.
Professor Morris, what do you think happens if you drop nuclear weapons on Iran? What do you think happens?
No, not on Iran.
This is so dishonest. He said that Benny Morris said that millions or tens of millions would die. He's implying that Benny said that directly, but now he's saying, well, that's actually the implication of what you're recommending. Like,
Iran,
Norman, you are misquoting.
Quoting you, Professor.
no, you're not quoting. That's a fucking lie. There's a reason this guy didn't get tenure, and he didn't deserve it. It's good he didn't.
Israel should use Israel. Would you let me finish telling you?
We can't work out who's saying what. So, Benny Morris, why don't you say what you believe you said?
Not just what I believe, but what I actually said. I said Israel should, if it is unable to do that work and destroy the Iranian nuclear project before they get nuclear weapons with conventional weaponry, we will have to use non-conventional weaponry. And what was meant by that...
So my question for you...
Okay. Let him finish, bro. Just let him get one sentence out. Oh, my God.
Let me finish the sentence.
Yeah, but
let me just finish my sentence.
You have to
what I meant by that is...
when you say that, don't you? All right.
No, let me explain
that
that Israel should use tactical nuclear weapons to destroy the Iranian nuclear plants, not bomb Iranian cities, not bomb the Iranian civilian population. But tactical nuclear weapons could do the job against their nuclear installations in Iran.
Okay, Norman Finkelstein. So he's clarified he doesn't mean dropping big nuclear weapons into civilian areas. He's talking about using tactical nuclear weapons to eliminate nuclear plants. What do you say to that?
What I say to that is actually quite simple.
Dropping nukes is a war crime and would kill so many civilians.
For many, many years, there has been the advocacy of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. In case your listeners are unaware, there's a nuclear weapon-free zone in Latin America. There's a nuclear weapons-free zone in Africa. There's a nuclear weapons-free zone in the South Pacific. And there has been a strong advocacy because of the dangers of a nuclear war in the Middle East to turn the Middle East into a nuclear weapons-free zone. The last vote was taken in the UN General Assembly in December 2022. It was a very close vote, very close. The vote was 175 states, including Iran.
It's going to be, he always brings up, he usually says the US, Israel, and then he always brings up like Samoa or the Solomon Islands. There's like some weird thing near fucking New Zealand or whatever in the like the Polynesian, I don't even know. So he always brings these up. I don't know if he'll do it again. Let's see if he does.
In favor of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, 1 against Israel, and 2 abstentions, Singapore and the United States.
Oh, he brought up Singapore, okay. Oh, I've never heard Singapore. Okay, it's a new country he brought up.
So, I think there's a very real danger of a nuclear escalation in the Middle East because Israel is, as the New York Times called it this past week, they called Israel a rogue state. That's the euphemism for a lunatic state. Israel is a lunatic state.
Like, what a weird thing. Like, well, the New York Times, in an op-ed written, called Israel a rogue state. Why would you even quote this? Like, what do you even... What? Like... What?
It has Iran in its crosshairs. It's determined to escalate, ratchet up the provocations until it could force the U.S. into the war with Iran, or, in Benny Morris's alternative, to use nuclear weapons, non-conventional weapons in Iran. So at this point, I think I can't speak for the immediate future because it may be too late. But certainly the prospect of a nuclear weapons-free Middle East would, I think, be the best option. The entire world supports it, except Israel. That's what the vote shows.
Can I say something now?
Can I say something? Yes, you can. Benny Morris, your chance to respond.
Yeah, I actually agree with Norman that the Middle East should be and should become a nuclear-free zone. The problem is that...
Nobody in the West would enforce that on any other country besides Israel. Nobody would do anything about it except for whatever Israel. That's the only issue. None of these countries in the Middle East give a fuck about what the UN says about nuclear weapons. Like what? Like it's supposed to be a chemical weapon-free zone? How's that working out in Syria?
Assuring that Iran would abide by anything it committed itself to would be a real problem. Iran has cheated every UN body which has looked at its nuclear project. It's cheated about almost everything it does. It's a regime of lies which...
I'm not aware of that. My understanding is for the when they were on that nuclear deal that they did more or less follow like the inspection protocols and everything. Now I know that like Saudi Arabia doesn't say that, and I don't believe Israel says that either. I don't know if that's truthful when they say it or if they're just super ass mad because they want Iran to be cucked out of any kind of nuclear reactor or anything, but yeah, that was my understanding. I haven't done like my Vyvanse deep dive into that, but my understanding is they more or less like adhered to the inspection guidelines.
One cannot expect to tell the truth, and therefore Israel can't depend on a promise by Iran that it won't develop nuclear weapons when Iran is so big it could do it in a dark corner somewhere in any corner of Iran and get away with it. So Israel is probably not going to demilitarize in terms of nuclear weapons on the say-so of Iran. But the whole idea of a rogue state, I don't remember reading anything in the New York Times about calling Israel a rogue state. But if there is a rogue state, let me finish. But if there is a rogue state in the Middle East, it's definitely Iran, at least in the eyes of most Western governments and intelligence services, because Iran has been a producer and creator and propagator and promoter of terrorism, and everything it does in connection with North Korea, in connection with Russia, in connection with every awful regime in this planet, to prove that it is a rogue state. There is one rogue state, one pariah state, and hopefully its regime will vanish in the near future.
Okay, Norman Finkelstein, let me just ask you. I mean, you seem.
I would like just
hang on, let me just put a question. I want to put a question to you, and then you can comment as you want.
One brief comment.
Hang on, let me you can respond, Norman. Let me put I'm allowed to ask questions. So let me just ask a question. You do seem oddly keen to defend Iran, to paint a picture of this poor country which is being constantly provoked and therefore has no option but to do what it does in terms of helping proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah and so on. Why are you so defensive of Iran when really most independent people who've looked at the situation, they may have just as many criticisms as you do of Israel and the way its government has been behaving, but nobody races to defend Iran. Why are you so keen to defend them?
I look at the documentary record, I look at the historical record, and I base my judgments on it. Let's just take the last point that Benny Morris made, and then I'll return to your major point. The last point Benny Morris made, for a surprising change, we agreed on the point. He said he too supports a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. However, he said that we can't trust Iran, that it's a conniving, cheating, deceptive, and so forth regime. So we can't trust it that it won't build a nuclear weapon. Now
he's going to say, I find that interesting when Israel is actually the rogue regime. Israel has done more violence and has had more aggressive attacks in the Middle East than any of these other countries. So why should Israel be allowed to have nuclear weapons and Iran not, right? It's the same argument that people make against the United States. Strange that the U.S. thinks they can bully who can have nuclear weapons when the U.S. is the only country that's ever nuked anybody.
I find that coming from an Israeli a very odd statement, because Professor Morris must know that it was through deception, conniving, deceiving, espionage, spying, and all sorts of other things that Israel created its nuclear weapons force. He has for sure read Avner Cohen's book on how the bomb was created, how Israel acquired nuclear weapons. Professor Morris, according to Avner Cohen, was it by being honest? Was it by being above board? Was it by allowing inspectors to see what Israel was doing in Dimona? Is that what happened, Professor Morris? So isn't this a classic case of the kettle calling the coffee pot black? For you to say we can't trust Iran after Israel's record on nuclear weapons, as even you so shamefacedly and...
Is that not a fair point? No, it's retarded as anybody that pretends that Israel has the same proclivities towards aggression or the same proclivities towards violence or genocide or whatever of like people in the Middle East as any of the surrounding aggressive countries is delusional. But I mean, like it's a meme argument that people like to make, I guess.
Shamelessly say, I don't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. You really don't? You advocate Israel's use of them in the event that the U.S. doesn't join the attack on Iran, but then you don't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. You're such a shameless liar, which is a sad fact. I spent many a week reading your books. I spent many a month reading your books, and to see how you have degenerated into a state propagandist and a bold-faced liar, very sad. Very sad.
All right, Benny Morris. Okay, we're going to make some incendiary comments there about Benny Morris. Benny Morris, defend yourself.
I don't think I'm shameless. I think I've written truthful books about the history. That's why Norman quotes me all the time. About the nuclear weapons, my assumption is Israel has them, but I've never seen them. I've never seen it confirmed by Israel that it has them. So it's sort of up in the air, but we can assume it has them. Why does Israel have nuclear weapons? Well, Norman actually understands.
I never saw the Roman Empire.
No, Norman, let me finish. Norman actually knows why Israel, if it has nuclear weapons, developed them in the 1950s and 60s, and that was because it was surrounded by a bunch of Arab countries which wanted to destroy it. They said, we will destroy you. We want to destroy Israel. So Israel was forced to build a nuclear stockpile so it would be able to deter the Arabs should they be able conventionally to overcome Israel. Israel managed to do that, never threatened anybody with use of nuclear weapons, never used them against anybody, even when its army was on its knees at the beginning of the 1973 war. It never threatened anybody with destruction like Iran does. It never threatened anybody like Hamas and the Hezbollah do daily, calling for Israel's destruction. But it did need this nuclear deterrent to stave off animals like the Iranian the Iranian government.
Okay. Norman?
He has nothing. He's just going to say some retarded shit. I can't believe people take this guy seriously, bro. Kill me. He's about to say just the most retarded thing you've ever heard. What's he going to say? What are we going to pivot to?
The Iranian government.
Okay.
The occupation of Palestine, It's fantastic to me. Israel's a bully. It's going to be something about Israeli aggression, I think. Or it's going to be a personal attack on Benny Morris being a state propagandist. One of those two things. That's my guess. I don't know.
Animals like the Iranian nuclear.
Do you think it's bad that they considered using nukes when they thought they were losing the war? I mean, it's bad in that you don't ever want people getting nuked, but I mean, like, they probably would imagine that if they lose the war, it's going to be a second Holocaust, so.
The Iranian government.
Okay. Norman?
I think at this point people have heard both sides, so I'd rather you move on to another question if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's move. I tell you what I want to move on to. I want to move on to the current state of the war in Gaza. I want to ask you, first of all, Norman Finkelstein, where you think this war now is. Prime Minister Netanyahu seems determined to continue prosecuting the war until every last member of Hamas has been killed or presumably put in prison. But in the process, a lot more civilians are dying on a daily basis. How does this war end, do you think?
Well,
the war ends when Israel decides to stop being a genocidal, crazy state, or when I don't know what angle he's going to go with. He's going to say, like, what should they do, or how evil and genocidal are they, and it'll end when every Palestinian is dead and they've collectively punished enough.
Well, I think we have to first get clear on the nomenclature. I don't believe it's a war. I actually think the actual, what you might call battlefield aspect of the conflict has been fairly trivial. I admit I can't prove that, but I can say, having followed it fairly closely, that you don't read in Gaza, you don't read about any major battles in Gaza. You don't read about any major...
That's absolutely not true. There might be others, but I can think of one off the top of my head. That Al-Shifa hospital attack, wasn't that like over the course of a week or two? Literally a 2-week siege for this coming back through Al-Shifa. This was a huge accomplishment too, if you believe anything that they post here, right? Where they captured like hundreds of militants. Wait, am I on the right war? Yes, yeah. So I don't know what he's saying where there's no battles or nothing is there. I don't know what the fuck he means when he says that, but okay.
Fairly trivial. I admit I can't prove that, but I can say, having followed it fairly closely, that you don't read in Gaza.
Fairly closely?
You don't read about any major battles in Gaza. You don't read about any major battlefield deaths in Gaza. What you hear is about a person here, a person there being killed, aside from the fact that since Israel is indiscriminately bombing Gaza with an unprecedented intensity, one can say with certainty large numbers of Hamas militants have been killed, but that's because large numbers of civilians have been killed. So you can guess, roughly speaking, the number of Hamas militants proportional to the population have been killed roughly in the same numbers as civilians killed. The main aim of the assault on Gaza
is either genocide, collective punishment, bringing the Palestinians to their knees, maybe ethnic cleansing to push them out of Gaza, maybe.
I think, having studied the record very closely, and here I think I've studied it as closely as anyone else, it's probably described as a genocide in Gaza. I think the main aim in Gaza has been to, as many Israelis have said, to make Gaza unlivable, make Gaza uninhabitable. And so, as the former chief of the National Security Council, Giora Eiland, he's now an advisor to the defense minister, as he put it, the people of Gaza will have only two choices left:
leave
to
or
stay
die.
and to starve, or to leave.
Yeah.
And that's, in my opinion, why Israel launched the assault on Rafah beginning in early May 7th, I think, because they wanted to finish the job. They wanted for there to be nothing left in Gaza, so the people of Gaza will have nothing left to return to. And that aim has, in my opinion, been largely achieved. The last numbers I read are that there are 40 million tons of rubble in Gaza, and it would take between 10 and 15 years just to clean out the rubble. The rubble is mixed with a lot of unexploded ordnance and toxic substances, so the estimate is 10 to 15okay, not to rebuild Gaza, but just to remove the rubber. I want to just, okay, let's go. Move ahead.
Okay, let me bring Benny. Benny, I want to read you a quote, Benny, before you respond. A quote from an interview you gave in 2014. You said, "There are circumstances in history that justify ethnic cleansing. I know this term is completely negative in the discourse of the 21st century, but when the choice is between ethnic cleansing and genocide, the annihilation of your people, I prefer ethnic cleansing." People think that what Israel is doing now in Gaza is a form of ethnic cleansing. Do you agree with that?
No, not really. I think Israel has been prosecuting a war against the Hamas since October 7th because the Hamas attacked Israel, slaughtered 1,250 people, took hostage children, old people, women, 250 of them, raped women, raped apparently men as well. And Israel decided that this was enough and we must destroy, this government decided we must destroy the Hamas. And that's what it's been doing for the last 9 months. And it's an organization which well deserves being destroyed. The organization, the Hamas fighters, 20,000, 30,000 of them have been hiding among the population, in the population, under the buildings, in the hospitals, in the schools, etc., etc. And this has necessitated Israel bombing here and there to kill Hamas people, and that's what it's been doing. And this has caused the.
Why do Israelis say Hamas that way? It's not said that in Arabic. It's just an H sound. I think in Arabic, their H's, I think, are in the back of their throat. So like Muhammad. I can't say it correct. I don't know how to speak this. Muhammad. But for Israelis, they have a CH sound that is more like guttural. So like Menachem. That sound doesn't exist in Arabic, but when people speaking Hebrew or who are fluent in Hebrew say Arabic words, I think they replaced that Muhammad. What's another word? Or like Mahmoud Abbas. Like I think an Arabic person would say like Mahmoud, but an Israeli person might say Mahmoud, or Hamas. They'll say like Hamas, but an Arabic person would say Hamas. I think they Hebrew speakers will do that other thing or whatever.
Israel bombing here and there to kill Hamas people, and that's what it's been doing. And this has caused enormous, terrible damage in Gaza, and it will take years to rebuild Gaza, but it will be rebuilt if the Hamas is destroyed. If it's not destroyed, there will be perpetual warfare between Israel and the Hamas, and the civilian population of the Gaza Strip will remain in miserable and terrible conditions. This, incidentally, was probably one of the aims of the Hamas when it initiated that assault on October 7th against Israel. It has anticipated that Israel would go into Gaza, would bomb Gaza, would kill lots of civilians, and then would, of course, be blamed for it by the international community and hounded by people like Norman Finkelstein intellectually. They expected that, and they probably want.
I agree with you that you can't infer the goals of the military from the quotes of random ministers who aren't even part of the war cabinet, but why does Israel struggle at holding the tongue of these ministers from saying obviously genocidal things? The issue is that they're not obviously genocidal things. People say a lot of things in war. It's fucking war. And especially after big terrorist attacks, people say all sorts of things. Look at the difference between, or look at how like Ukrainians and shit are talking about Russia. It's hard. Like if you're trying to find genocide everywhere, then looking at how countries speak about their enemies during war, you're going to find genocide everywhere. Like it's just a stupid like lens of analysis for it.
That, and they don't care about how many civilians die in Gaza because they all go to heaven according to the Hamas fundamentalist beliefs. So they're actually martyrs, so they shouldn't even complain about it. The Hamas built itself a lot.
Jesus Christ. That's a wild statement.
Gaza would kill lots of civilians and then would, of course, be blamed for it by the international community and hounded by people like Norman Finkelstein intellectually. They expected that, and they probably wanted that. And they don't care about how many civilians die in Gaza because they all go to heaven according to the Hamas fundamentalist beliefs. So they're actually martyrs, so they shouldn't even complain about it. The Hamas built itself a large tunnel network under the Gaza Strip, some 700 kilometers worth of tunnels, which it never allowed civilians in the Gaza Strip to enter because it wanted the civilians to die outside.
All right, Norman Finkelstein, I mean, it's hard to... all I would say is, it is hard to disagree when Benny Morris says that Hamas obviously knew what the response was going to be here. You can't go into Israel and slaughter 1,200 people and wound nearly 7,000 more in the most grotesque...
That number is probably going to go up by 100 as well, right? From 1,250 to 1,350 or whatever? Because there's still like 100 hostages unaccounted for?
Medieval barbaric manner, and not assume that Israel would respond in the way that it has. So you would surely agree with that Hamas must have known what was going to come back.
I'll address that question in a half moment. I would first like to address what Professor Morris had to say, and then I promise you I'll get back to that question. What Professor Morris says, Israel is attacking Hamas. Israel is focused on Hamas. And everything else is, to use the technical expression, it's collateral damage. Regrettable, sad, but collateral damage. So let's take a report that came out today from B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories.
And
it documents in excruciating detail the massive, relentless torture that Israel is inflicting on the detainees since October 7th. Now, people worry, justifiably, about the torture that might be inflicted on the hostages in Gaza. But what about, according to B'Tselem, there are 10,000 detainees now who are being relentlessly, brutally tortured, including sexual torture.
It would help if you put forward some hard lines or examples on what exactly you need to see from Israel to prove the intent, because if people just keep showing quotes and you say that doesn't count, it kind of feels like how you're telling people about the Jan 6 speech, but they keep saying, doesn't matter, he said peacefully. It's... When you're looking at intent for an entire thing, you're showing a combination of, for January 6th, I don't just argue quotes. I argue a cohesive plan that existed for months. I argue quotes, not just quotes, but quotes from entire speeches from Donald Trump across multiple social media platforms for weeks. We look at speeches that he's made that align with a plot that he has crafted, actions that are being taken. We look at the way that the people are responding to the quotes that he's saying. We look at the actions that happened on the day of, both as part of the coup and part of the insurrection. And then we look at the action of the leader during these things. That's the argument. It's never just a single quote. The biggest kill shot, but the problem is nobody knows what genocide is. People think genocide is just killing a lot of people. That's what you think it is, then it's a genocide. But the easiest kill shot is you ask somebody, okay, well, let's say tomorrow Hamas surrenders. What do you think would happen? If Hamas surrendered tomorrow and all of Hamas left the Gaza Strip, would the war continue? No, it wouldn't. That's not a genocide. You can't surrender during a genocide. You can't say, okay, we're going to stop fighting and now we're chill. That doesn't happen in a genocide. It doesn't make any sense. The fact that it was in response to a specific military attack, which it was, the fact that factually, whether you think they do enough or not, they do more than any other military on the planet to try to take care of the enemy civilian population. The fact that the enemy government, whether you like it or not, they don't even contest this. The enemy government does everything they can to induce civilian casualties on their own side. They don't build bomb shelters. They don't try to set up humanitarian corridors, and they keep people in their houses, and they try not to let them flee when they're conducting military operations. They don't fight from combat areas. They don't use combat uniforms, and they store weapons and munitions in civilian households, and they use their hospitals as detention centers or torture centers. All of this is like in the open. None of them saying like all of these things are true. Like the argument for you're so far away from an argument for genocide. You're so far away from one. You can give me like 500 quotes, and it probably still wouldn't be. You might be able to show me a quote of Netanyahu going, "We're going to genocide the Palestinians," and I still probably don't think you're even close to a genocide at that point. Even if he said that like explicitly, you could get him for the war crime of. I think that if you make genocidal statements with clear and obvious genocidal rhetoric, even if a genocide isn't happening, I think you can still get charged with that war crime. So maybe you could get him on a war crime for that. But even at that point, I don't know if I would say there's a genocide happening in Gaza. It doesn't seem like it. Just nothing maps onto any like modern or historical understanding of what a genocide is.
Torture, not just sexual violence, but beyond the generic sexual violence, sodomy and so forth. Was that targeting Hamas? Are all those 10,000 detainees who have been randomly collected by Israel, they're all Hamas? And let's assume...
If Hamas fully surrendered, wouldn't Bibi claim the need to go door to door to get every last one? Well, I'm saying if they really surrendered, not like we surrender and they still fight. I mean, like if they surrendered, like they just up and left or some bullshit. Or if they publicly like announce they surrendered and then Israel like continues to like persecute like a huge war campaign, I think that then the entire world and Israel, I don't think Israel itself could support that. The country would tear itself apart. I don't think they would support that. That people in Israel wouldn't support that. No, I don't think so. And that's been pretty consistent with the entire history of military operations from Israel to other people. You could probably in the 40s and 50s, you could probably make stronger arguments for Israel being genocidal in nature versus today. It's just stupid.
Was Hamas.
Can I respond
and
to
let's
that?
Assume,
Can I respond?
Let's assume...
Wait 1 second, but you will be in a minute, yes.
Piers, and let's assume that Hamas knew Israel...
You always say Israel does more than any other military to protect the civilian population. What do? They mass drop leaflets. I believe they broadcast things on the radio waves. I believe that they do. They have civilian population registrars, so they find out who lives in particular apartment buildings. So they make phone calls to community leaders in apartment buildings, warning them before a particular strike. They tried roof knocking for a while. I don't believe they do that anymore. I think for a while they were saying for 2 hours a day there are certain humanitarian corridors that they'll try to stay away from as people move. Before they began their big invasion into Rafah, the final city in Gaza that they needed to fight in a couple months ago, they evacuated over 1 million people to the north. Keep in mind that Israel is doing all of these things while the enemy is fighting from civilian areas, while the enemy is trying to get as many civilians to die as possible, while the enemy is not cooperating or helping whatsoever, while the enemy is not like trying to establish like all of these things are being done. Israel has to take care of the entire civilian population, the enemy civilian population, while the enemy does nothing. Like no other country, you can't name a single example of any other scenario like this in history. You can't name one. You can't name a single example. No, you can't name a single example of this ever happening in all of human history.
would react. Now, I'm asking you a simple question, Piers. Do you think that does that justify Israel's infliction of massive torture on roughly now 10,000 Palestinian detainees from Gaza who were randomly rounded up since October 7th? Now, One last point, and then it's over to Professor Morris. Professor Morris wants us to believe that Israel is engaging in a pinpoint war against Hamas with collateral damage. He didn't use the expression collateral damage. I'm using it, but you get the point. So here's my question. I've spent the past 8 months reading through the human rights reports. I've read the reports of Save the Children. I've read the reports of UNICEF. I've read the reports of the World Food Program. I've read the reports of USAID. I've read the reports of the World Bank, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development.
Norman, you're reading much too much.
The World Health Organization. Now I ask you, Piers.
Notice he doesn't respond to the question the longest half moment. Yeah, he does this all the time.
Is it plausible?
Why does he circle jerk so much about reading? If you haven't learned this on my stream yet, you should know this. It's always a huge red flag when people allude to reading things or when people cite credentials without being able to accurately summarize or give information in context about what they've read. That should always be a huge red flag to you. I think it's actually, you would say it's a fallacious appeal to authority. You can't just cite something and not be able to give the rationale behind it or not be able to contextualize it or talk about the thing. You can't just cite to it, right?
Is it believable that all these internationally eminent and respected human rights organizations, when they say that Israel is targeting the civilian population of Gaza, is it plausible, Piers, that they are all conspiring in a monumental...
Would the U.S. campaign against ISIS in Mosul not count? Was it the Battle of Mosul or was it the Battle of Fallujah? Didn't the United States... And I don't know if we actually did this. Didn't the U.S. say something along the lines of like, it might have been for Fallujah before we evacuated everybody. Didn't the U.S. say, if you're still here, we're basically saying you're a terrorist? Am I crazy on that? Am I forgetting that? I don't know if the U.S. actually treated people like that, but I thought they literally said that. If Israel would make an announcement like that, the whole world would be like self-destructing in anger. I should try and find a source for that, actually. Let's see. Battle of Fallujah. Was it this one? Was it this, the second battle? Control F, civilians. Most of Fallujah's civilian population fled the city before the battle, which greatly reduced the potential for non-combatant casualties. U.S. military officials estimated that 70 to 90% of the 300,000 civilians in the city fled before the attack, leaving 30 to 90,000 civilians left. The military used leaflets and broadcasts to encourage civilians to leave the city before the assault. However, multiple news agencies reported that military-aged males were prevented from leaving or entering the city by the U.S. military. Additionally, not all civilians had the means to leave Fallujah before the battle. Jane Aref, who was embedded with U.S. troops, said that some families wrote, "We are family," on the doors of their homes, hoping the Marines were not attacked during the battle. I'm trying to see if I can source that statement of them saying, if you're still here, we're treating you as a military. A book, bruh. Was Vietnam not similar? The Viet Cong intentionally operated in civilian areas and made it tough for U.S. forces to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants so that they could push propaganda about us. I don't know if that, I don't remember that from Vietnam. I'm not sure. From what I remember about Vietnam and the allegations of things like guerrilla warfare was that they fought from like highly advantageous terrain that they had a really good understanding of, that they utilized things like booby traps and everything really well. I don't know if it was also like fighting from civilian areas or pretending to be civilians as much. That might have been a thing. I've never studied Vietnam War. I don't remember that was like as huge of a thing for them. I don't know. Destiny said they go above and beyond every single military, and it's simply not true. Cow Milker, name one example. Cow Milker. Wait, Control F. Cow Milker. Go. One example. I know you've named it. I hope you've said it in chat. 19 messages. Oh boy. Let's find out. They do not do more than any other military. At Destiny, no proof is good enough for you. Nothing? Nothing? Not a single example? Nothing? Okay. Nope. See ya. Should have named something. Bye.
Hoax to deny that Israel is, in fact, only targeting Hamas. Is that believable?
Well, no. Here's what I would say. Let me answer. I will come to Benny
Piers,
for a
can I-
answer. But
can I answer?
Yes, you can, Benny. One moment. My response myself would be that you missed out a report that came out yesterday where the United Nations accepted that I think it was 8 or 9 members of its employees had been taking part on the attacks on October the 7th. So you didn't mention that report. So reports can be, multifaceted in what they reveal about what's going on here. Also, I would say this. I would also say this. I would say, as I said from the very start of this, after the scale of the attack on October the 7th, Israel didn't just have a right to defend itself, it had a moral duty to defend itself. It was the scale of proportionate response that was always, for me, the great moral quandary. How much is too much? And there's no doubt it's a particularly difficult war to propagate because you have Hamas living amongst civilians in Gaza, and the civilian population is 50% under 18. This gives it an almost unique nature, this war, that we haven't seen anywhere else in the world. So it's very complicated. It's not easy. There's no simple answer. But to come to Benny Morris, I would say this, that the problem Israel has is that Netanyahu is utterly determined, it seems, to continue this war, fighting it until every last member of Hamas is eliminated. But this is clearly taking a lot longer than he anticipated. And in the process, many thousands more civilians are being killed. And public support around the world for Israel, outside of the US.
Why did you leave the Fallujah wiki before finding the quote? You were trying to make a point on U.S. conduct. I was trying to find the quote where they said that if you're still in the city, we're going to treat you as a combatant. I don't need that to make my point. I've heard that quote before and I just said it before. But the ultimate source was a book, and I don't own the book. Do you want to go and search for it?
Has been dramatically reducing to the point where Israel is becoming almost a pariah. And I just wonder how you feel about that and whether there is a way through this which brings this to an end, which doesn't involve killing every last member of Hamas.
As far as I remember, Netanyahu said that he wants to get every one of those 3,000 Hamasniks who crossed the border and slaughtered Israelis, he wants to get them either on trial or kill them. I don't know if he said he wants to kill every last Hamasnik, and there probably is no such thing, because every day, every week, every month, they probably hire new...
My question for Destiny is whether the Viet Cong is responsible for heavy rates of civilian casualties the U.S. inflicted on Vietnam for its use of human shields embedding among civilians. According to international humanitarian law, yes, they would be, because you're not supposed to operate among civilians, and the overwhelming force of your enemy doesn't absolve you from following customary rules of law or customary international law or laws of armed conflict. So yes, you would be responsible.
Recruit new fighters. So that's an important...
Well, hold on. The only... hold on. No, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. The thing I was thinking is I don't know enough about the origination of the Vietnam War and the Gulf of Tonkin incident and all that bullshit. But because I was going to say, well, if you start a war under false pretenses and the United States bombs like a civilian city to kill militants or whatever, then I don't think you would be at fault for that. But if you're conducting military operations and you're moving through the civilian population and you're utilizing that for propaganda purposes, meaning you're expecting to get a military advantage, or you are that becomes part of your battle tactics, yeah, that would be it doesn't matter if you're, for some reason, a lot of like bleeding heart losers like to say that like, oh, but it's not fair, the other side is so big and strong. It doesn't matter. That doesn't absolve you from your responsibility to make sure that your civilian population is not being killed in combat. Possibility.
But it does want to destroy Hamas as a military and a governmental organization, and that's something I certainly identify with. I don't think that Norman is quoting correctly. I don't think...
What about the proportionality principle? Does that still not apply? No, proportionality always applies. Both sides can be doing wrong at the same time. Let's say that one militant fires a rocket from a civilian apartment complex. It was just one militant. He had one rocket launcher. He fires one rocket out of an apartment complex that has 5,000 civilians. And then let's say that the enemy, because they see that rocket, decides to bomb that apartment complex. You would say that the attacker of the apartment complex that bombed it probably didn't engage in a good proportionality assessment, and then that would be not good. It's arguably a war crime, right? If you can show that they knew how many civilians were in there and everything, and they bombed it anyway, right? However, the other side, in fighting from a civilian area and hoping to gain an advantage of that, is also engaged in a war crime. I believe that would be a war crime, Rome Statute war crime. So like both sides can commit war crimes at the same time. There are two different obligations about taking care of civilian populations in the time of war, and they apply to the same civilian population has to be taken care of by both sides. The belligerent, the attacker, has an obligation to ensure the safety and the feeding and the humanitarian aid to the enemy civilian population. And your own military, you also have to ensure, in as much as possible, humanitarian aid and safety or whatever of your own civilian population. The obligation exists on both sides. The obligation can be failed on both sides, or it can be failed on one side. It just depends.
That all the world's human rights organizations are saying that Israel targets civilians. I do believe that they say Israel has killed lots of civilians alongside Hamas people, and that's certainly true. But I don't really know what the way out of this is. Unless Hamas gives up the hostages, it's still...
Just to clarify, is your position the U.S. did not sufficiently consider civilians in Fallujah in comparison to Israel? No, I think that the U.S. probably did about as much as they needed to, but Fallujah was different in that, one, you weren't necessarily dealing with terrorists, and two, the combat theater, the operations were in an area where there were way more places for civilians to flee to. It wasn't an as restricted an area as the Gaza Strip. So the U.S. military didn't have to take the same level of care or as much care necessarily as the Israeli military has to. So for instance, I've never heard of the United States military doing phone calls to apartment complexes to evacuate people. I've never heard that the U.S. military did that in Fallujah. If they did, you could show me that. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe Israel took the same care that the U.S. military did. But I think it's the Lieber Institute. I think Kyle Schmidt had written an article about whether or not, or it might have been John Spencer, had written an article about whether or not Israel is taking enough care of the enemy civilian population. And he makes the same argument that it seems like they do more than any other military force of the world has ever done for taking care of an enemy civilian population. Now, whether it's enough or not is obviously up for debate, but
holds and agrees to disarm and to stop firing at Israel. Otherwise, this will go on and on until essentially the Hamas, as you say, every last one of them is killed, at least in Netanyahu's eyes. Just let me add one other thing. Netanyahu doesn't really represent the will of all Israelis, probably not even most Israelis at this stage. He's an incompetent, I think, cowardly and immoral leader. He's a corrupt politician. All he's really interested in, or mainly...
Oh, sorry. Second Battle of Fallujah was against, I guess, Al-Qaeda and shit. My bad.
Interested in saving his own skin and not going to jail on corruption charges and to stay in control of the premiership. That's what he aims at. And prolonging the war seems to help him do this. So far, the Israeli public says, well, we'll have elections, but only after we finish the war with Hamas. But now it's all become very complicated because it's not just the Hamas, it's the Hezbollah and it's the Iranians and it's the Houthis in Yemen Israel has to confront. So Hamas has actually been sidelined by recent events.
I would imagine that Norman Finkelstein would pretty much agree with everything you said about Netanyahu just then. And I always like to end these debates, which is a fascinating debate.
I wouldn't.
You don't, well, let me give you a final word then, just on what Benny said about Netanyahu. I assumed you'd agree.
No, not at all. Because for years I've been reading in the pages of the Israeli liberal press that Netanyahu's finished, Netanyahu will be out. But he keeps coming back. He keeps coming back. Like that old camp song, the cat coming back.
Why is Israel still acting so kind of giving? One is this stuff. Why not just go in full force? Because Israel's a democracy, and the government has to maintain some kind of legitimacy. And if the government goes too unhinged, Israel already hosts a ton of its own criticism, and they already the leadership is already completely unpopular. Netanyahu is supposed to lose the next elections, right? The military is to some extent beholden by the will of the voters, and if they are too unhinged, then they lose all their legitimacy.
He wouldn't go away. Why does he keep coming back? It's a very simple reason. Netanyahu is an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. Let me repeat that, an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. And in that respect, he's the perfect mirror of Israeli society. When they see Netanyahu, they see themselves, and that's why they vote for him.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Benny, I can't keep letting you go back at each other because unfortunately...
Okay, good one. 5 minutes.